When my landlady tore up our rental contract and said, "Let's make a new deal," I didn't realize she wasn't talking about rent, she was talking about us. I arrived at the house on a late afternoon when the sky was the color of faded gold, the kind of light that makes everything seem softer than it really is. The house stood on a quiet coastal street, its white paint weathered but dignified, framed by overgrown lavender bushes that carried a scent both sweet and grounding. I was there to sign a 6-month rental contract, nothing more. Or at least, that's what I believed. She opened the door before I could knock twice. Clara Bennett. My new landlady. She looked to be in her early 40s, poised, self-assured, and effortlessly graceful. Her voice, when she spoke, had the calm authority of someone used to being listened to, but there was a warmth beneath it too, like she was used to softening her strength so it wouldn't intimidate. "You must be Daniel," she said. "Come in. Watch your step, the floor creaks more than it complains." Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and sea salt. Light spilled through lace curtains, catching the dust in lazy, golden swirls. Clara moved with quiet precision, one hand guiding the tour, the other tucking stray hair behind her ear. As she spoke about the rent, utilities, and where the spare key was kept, I found myself focusing less on her words and more on the way her bracelets chimed softly when she gestured. We walked through each room, the living space with its crackling fireplace, a small study that overlooked the garden, and finally the bedroom I'd be renting. "It's nothing fancy," she said, standing in the doorway, "but it's peaceful. Most people come here to rest from something." She didn't elaborate on what that something might be, and I didn't ask. When I signed the contract at her kitchen table, the pen felt heavier than it should have. She poured coffee while I read through the clauses: no loud guests, no pets, no overnight visitors without notice. "You'll find I'm not a strict landlady," she said with a smile, "just one who values quiet." Her tone was easy, but her gaze lingered on me for a heartbeat longer than expected, assessing, not judging. I felt seen in a way that was both unsettling and oddly comforting. As I left the kitchen, key warm in my palm, I caught a glimpse of her by the window, adjusting a vase of lilies. The late sunlight traced the curve of her shoulder, outlining her in gold. I didn't know it then, but that image, the quiet strength in her posture, the calm steadiness in her eyes, would stay with me long after the ink on that contract dried. The first week passed quietly, marked by the gentle rhythm of routine, the sound of the kettle whistling downstairs, the occasional creak of the floorboards, the scent of freshly brewed coffee drifting through the hallway each morning. Clara kept to herself, though her presence seemed to linger in every corner of the house. I'd catch glimpses of her through doorways, arranging flowers, reading by the window, humming to an old jazz record that crackled with nostalgia. We spoke only in passing at first. A polite, "good morning," or a soft, "did you sleep well?" Yet beneath those small exchanges, something wordless began to take shape, a quiet awareness, fragile and unspoken. She had a way of speaking that made ordinary things sound intentional, like she meant every syllable she gave away. One evening, I found her in the garden, kneeling by the flower beds. The sky was dipped in lavender twilight, and the smell of damp earth filled the air. "You should see how quickly these bloom after rain," she said without looking up. Her voice was calm, but there was something in it, a wistfulness that made me pause. I knelt beside her, helping clear the soil from around a stubborn root. For a few minutes, we worked in silence, the space between us charged but easy. When our hands brushed accidentally, she glanced up. "Careful," she murmured, "the thorns don't forgive carelessness." Later that week, a pipe burst under the kitchen sink. She called for me to help, and before I could think, I was kneeling beside her again, sleeves rolled up, water splashing across the tiles. Her perfume mixed with the smell of metal and soap, clean, steady, grounding. We laughed as the wrench slipped from my hand, spraying both of us. "You're not much of a handyman," she teased, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. Then it happened, a fleeting, electric touch. My fingers grazed hers as we reached for the same tool. It lasted only a second, but it felt like time paused around that contact. She froze too, eyes flickering to mine before she stepped back. "That's enough for tonight," she said softly, a faint smile tugging at her lips. When I went upstairs, my shirt damp and my thoughts restless, I realized something had shifted. The boundaries she'd drawn, polite, professional, deliberate, had blurred, just slightly. And though neither of us said a word about it, the air between us carried a quiet tension, like the breath before rain. Every sound in that old house felt louder after that, her footsteps, the closing of doors, the kettle's soft hiss, reminders that I wasn't just living under her roof anymore, I was living near her orbit. A few days later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, I was wandering through the hallway when a soft glimmer of light caught my eye. A small picture frame hung slightly askew near the staircase, the kind of thing you'd pass 100 times without noticing, unless the sunlight happened to catch the glass just right. Inside it was a faded photograph, a younger Clara, her smile easy and unguarded, standing beside a man with kind eyes and a camera hanging from his neck. The image had the gentle wear of something often dusted but never moved. I didn't hear her approach until her voice came from behind me, low, even, but tinged with memory. "That was my husband. He used to say the camera helped him see beauty in things others ignored." She paused, fingers brushing the frame as if tracing a memory. "He passed away 7 years ago." I turned to apologize for intruding, but she shook her head, offering a small, bittersweet smile. "It's all right. I don't hide him. I just stopped explaining." There was a vulnerability in her tone, quiet, honest, the kind that draws respect rather than pity. That evening, she knocked on my door with 2 steaming mugs of tea. "I figured you could use a break from writing," she said. Her hair was tied loosely, a few strands escaping to frame her face. I followed her to the living room, where a single candle flickered on the table, casting soft amber light across the walls. We talked for hours, not about love or loss directly, but about everything that circles it. She told me about the books her husband loved, the garden he built, the way grief softens rather than fades. I listened, caught between admiration and something deeper, the realization that she wasn't defined by sadness, but by the strength it took to live with it. When she laughed, it was quiet but real, her eyes crinkling at the corners. At one point, she reached across the table to refill my cup. Her fingers brushed mine, not by accident, not carelessly, but gently, deliberately. The contact was brief, but it carried warmth that went beyond comfort. As the candle burned lower, our words grew softer. Outside, the wind hummed through the trees, steady and distant. I remember thinking that if silence had a shape, it would look like that moment, 2 people sharing warmth without needing to name it. When I went to bed that night, the air still carried the faint scent of jasmine tea and candle wax. For the first time, the house didn't feel like a rental. It felt like somewhere I wanted to stay, not for the view, not for the quiet, but for the woman who somehow made both feel alive. The rain began early that week, a restless, unbroken rhythm tapping against the windows and roof tiles. The sea beyond the hill vanished into a pale mist, and the whole town seemed to fall into a kind of suspended stillness. Inside the house, time felt slower, stretched out between the sound of raindrops and the soft crackle of the fireplace. Clara and I spent most of those days indoors. I worked at my desk by the window, trying to focus on my writing, though the sound of her moving through the house kept pulling me back to the present, the faint echo of her footsteps upstairs, the soft clinking of plates, the hum of her voice when she spoke to herself. It was ordinary domestic noise, but to me it felt intimate, grounding, alive. By the 3rd night, a storm had settled over the coast. Lightning flashed far off the horizon, followed by a low, shuddering roll of thunder. When the lights flickered, Clara appeared at my door with a candle in her hand, her expression calm but tired. "Power's out again," she said. "You can come downstairs if you'd rather not work by candlelight." I followed her to the living room, where she had already lit half a dozen candles. Their glow painted the walls in amber and gold, turning shadows into soft movements. She'd wrapped herself in a knitted blanket and gestured for me to sit beside her on the couch. For a while, we talked about trivial things, her favorite travel stories, the time I almost burned pasta in college, both of us avoiding the heavy silence that lingered between sentences. The blanket shifted as we sat closer, shoulders almost touching. Each small movement sent a wave of awareness through me, the warmth of her body beside mine, the faint scent of vanilla and rain in her hair, the steady rhythm of her breathing. When thunder rattled the windows, she laughed quietly, admitting she'd never quite gotten used to storms since her husband's passing. He used to count the seconds between lightning and thunder, she said. Said it made fear measurable. Without thinking, I said softly, then let's count together. Our voices overlapped, low and steady, and for a few seconds the storm outside felt far away. At one point, our hands rested on the same edge of the blanket. Neither of us moved them. The room was hushed, except for the rain and the fire's occasional sigh. Then she turned to me, her eyes calm but searching. You know this isn't supposed to feel easy, she whispered. I nodded, unable to answer. Because she was right, it wasn't easy. It was real. And sometimes that's the most difficult kind of warmth to sit in. The storm passed overnight, leaving behind a washed-clean stillness. The air smelled of salt and wet earth, and thin light slipped through the curtains like the first breath after holding it too long. I woke earlier than usual, uneasy but not sure why. Downstairs, I found Clara already awake, standing by the kitchen window, a mug of coffee cradled between both hands. Her hair was slightly undone, her posture straighter than usual, as if she'd made a decision before sunrise. Morning, I said quietly. She turned, her expression unreadable, a faint tension around her mouth. Morning, she replied. Could we talk for a moment? The words hung there, calm, deliberate, but they carried a weight I couldn't name. She gestured to the table where the rental contract lay, folded neatly beside a pen. I sat down, heart thudding a little too fast. I've been thinking, she began, eyes still on the paper. When you moved in, I thought I needed structure. Boundaries. Something predictable to hold on to. She paused, tracing the edge of the contract with her fingertip. But lately, I find myself caring less about rules and more about, her voice faltered, searching for the right word. Moments. She lifted her gaze to mine, steady, vulnerable, unguarded in a way I'd never seen before. I don't want this to be about rent anymore. Or deadlines. Or agreements on paper. And before I could respond, she picked up the contract and tore it cleanly down the middle. The sound of tearing paper was startlingly loud in the still morning air. Let's forget this, she said softly, the corner of her mouth trembling between resolve and hesitation. If you stay, let it be because you want to. Not because of a contract. For a heartbeat, I couldn't move. My thoughts raced. What did she mean, really? Was this about kindness, or was it about us? The room felt charged, fragile, like one wrong word could shatter whatever this moment was trying to hold. She placed the torn pieces on the table, exhaled, and said with a half-smile, "That's all I wanted to say." Then she turned and walked toward the garden, her figure framed by soft light and drifting leaves. I sat there in silence, the smell of coffee and rain lingering in the air. My hands rested on the table beside the torn pages, symbols of something ending, and maybe something else quietly beginning. For the first time since I'd moved in, the house didn't feel like it belonged to her. It felt suspended between us, uncertain, but alive with possibility. Evening settled over the house like a hush, a deep, steady quiet that made every small sound feel intimate. The torn contract still sat on the kitchen counter where she had left it, its edges curling slightly, as if the paper itself resisted being discarded. I must have walked past it a dozen times that day, pretending I wasn't thinking about what she had said. But every glance toward it pulled at me, not because of the words written on it, but because of what she meant when she tore them apart. By nightfall, I couldn't sit still anymore. My mind replayed her voice, soft but sure, "If you stay, let it be because you want to. It wasn't a business proposition, it was an invitation, and my silence that morning felt like an answer left unfinished. Her light was still on. I hesitated outside her door, hearing faint music from inside, an old piano instrumental, slow and thoughtful. I knocked gently. Clara opened the door wearing a loose gray sweater, her hair unpinned, falling softly around her shoulders. She looked surprised, but not displeased. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Not exactly," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "I think we left something unfinished." She tilted her head slightly, waiting. I stepped inside, the room warm with firelight, casting a gentle glow across her face. "About what you said," I continued. "If we're making a new deal, maybe it should start with honesty." For a moment, she didn't speak, only studied me with that patient steadiness I'd come to know. Then she sighed, half a laugh, half an admission. "Honesty sounds risky," she murmured. "Maybe," I said, "but so does pretending." Something shifted in her expression, not shock, not fear, but release. She sat on the edge of the sofa, gesturing for me to do the same. The fire crackled softly between us. "I've spent so long keeping things measured," she said, her eyes lowered. "Even kindness, even care, I had to ration it, or it started to hurt." I nodded, feeling the truth of it settle between us. "You don't have to ration it with me," I said gently. Her gaze met mine, uncertain at first, then steady, warm. Slowly, she reached across the space between us, fingers brushing against my hand, testing the air like someone relearning trust. The contact was light, almost weightless, but the moment was not. It carried the weight of every unspoken word we hadn't dared say. Outside, the wind softened. Inside, we said nothing more. Our hands remained joined, the firelight dancing in our reflections, the quiet beginning of a promise neither of us had planned, but both somehow needed. Weeks passed quietly after that night, not with the rush of something new, but with the steady rhythm of something real finding its place. The house, once a temporary stop in my life, began to feel like the center of it. The mornings were no longer marked by the sound of me making coffee alone, but by Clara's soft footsteps in the kitchen and the low hum of a tune she never quite finished. We didn't name what was happening between us. There were no grand declarations, no need to explain it to anyone. It existed in the small things, the way she poured a second cup of tea before I even asked, the way my jacket found its place on the same hook as hers, the way her laughter filled the spaces that used to echo with silence. One Saturday, she asked for help repainting the front door. The sun was bright, the air smelled of fresh paint and sea salt, and our hands were speckled with flecks of white. "You missed a spot," I teased, pointing at her cheek. She looked at me, eyes glinting, and dabbed a streak of paint on my arm in retaliation. We both laughed, that easy, unguarded kind of laughter that felt like an unspoken promise that things were good, and safe, and ours. Later that evening, as we watched the light fade from the porch, she leaned against the railing, her hair catching the wind. "You've changed the house," she said softly. "It used to be too quiet. Now it breathes again." I smiled, shaking my head. "You changed it first. You just let me stay long enough to notice." She turned to me then, her hand finding mine with an ease that no longer felt hesitant. The touch wasn't dramatic, it didn't need to be. It was steady, familiar, and full of quiet certainty. The kind of touch that said, "We're here, and that's enough." When we walked down to the beach at dusk, the tide was low and the horizon glowed in shades of copper and blue. The sound of waves blended with the soft rustle of her dress. She slipped her hand into mine again, fitting naturally, as though it had always belonged there. I remember thinking how strange it was, how something that began as a simple rental agreement had become a shared life, one built not on paper or rules, but on trust, time, and a kind of love that didn't need to be announced to be felt. As we stood there, the wind brushing past us and the sky deepening into twilight, I realized what she meant that morning when she tore up the contract. She wasn't ending something. She was beginning it, and this time, it had both our names written all over it. If you felt that warmth, that quiet kind of love that grows in the silence, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more age gap slow burn stories that remind us love often begins where rules end.